Carrie. So great to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to have you here. There's multiple reasons why I asked you to be here. One of them, let me just close this out. Hey, well, before we start that, I just want to say hello to some of our viewers here. Hey, Robert, great to see you. And let me ask you, Robert, my guest, do you prefer Robert or Rob?
They both work. I
Okay.
promise. Yes.
Awesome. So we'll go a little bit back and forth with that. So one of the reasons why I asked you first to be here and connected with you is because, as you may or may not know, the work that I do is centered around joy. And it's taken a long time for me personally to be able to really understand what joy was. And I went through a stage of, what they would call now toxic positivity and really just hitting the surface of happiness and joy. And it took a lot of work to really understand that more fully. And so when I see your work, you don't come off as that to me, as the person that's surface with it. It is a deep knowing, a deep connection that I feel from you. And so I just wanted to be able to share what I've been able to see with the world.
Oh, you send me an address, I'm going to send you a personal check. That's a compliment. I feel like I owe you for that. Yeah, it's something that I've spent my entire life wanting to experience and mostly attempting to understand. And I would say I started off in a very superficial and sort of shallow place with it. I think lots of us do. And over time, I've learned that it's an ever unfolding, ever evolving experience.
Mhm.
And that most of what we think is happiness is not happiness at all. In fact, I'd argue that happiness is nothing that you can possibly think. It's something that you can only experience. So experience is the only explanation.
I love that. It's something that I spoke about. And by the way, as I mentioned a few things, I just want the audience to know, and I'm not plugging my own stuff, but I just feel like deeply connected with. I've watched so much of your work, uh, and I've seen it show up in my own work. In my first TEDx talk that I did, I talked about this elusive seeking of happiness, the chasing of it, and it always seeming to like fall through our hands. And I know that would you talk a little bit about the pursuit of happiness and how I know in psychology research, the positive psychology research, they say that that pursuit actually makes us unhappier?
Yeah, it's true. I think there are lots of ways to look at that. I would say that most of us think we're pursuing happiness, and what we're ultimately pursuing is success or love or approval or pleasure or excitement or entertainment. And while happiness can include those experiences, it doesn't equate to those experiences, right? And so I would say that there's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful or healthy or feel loved or experience pleasure at all without any question. And my only encouragement is to try to go directly to the source for happiness. So happiness is not something that exists in the past or future. It exists here and now. It's not something that exists in the world or in other people or other places. It exists within you and you only. And so if you're looking for or pursuing or chasing happiness anywhere in the past or future or outside of you and other people, places, or things, you're going to find that you come up short time and time again, right? So that can be hard to sort of understand. Like, well, how do I go into myself to find this thing you call happiness? But all of us have an intuitive appreciation and understanding and experience with that all day, every day. And that's why little kids often are much happier than grown adults, and why small animals are, so much happier than even the most evolved adults often. So yes, the pursuit of happiness is often routed through other people, places, and things. And that's why it doesn't lead to happiness ultimately.
Yeah, and I love that. Like it feels like a lot of us feel that it's almost a transactional. Like if I do this thing, then I'll get the happiness. And what I've seen and read in your work, and what I believe, without putting words in your mouth, that you stand for, is that in the aligning with the happiness without those things, that is how we get the things that it is that we ultimately want: the success, the career, the money, the relationships. Is that right?
Absolutely. So success doesn't lead to happiness. We know that. We know that just because you make more money, have a healthier body, have a more beautiful body, are younger, or have more kids, are married, none of those things lead to lasting, meaningful, and abiding happiness whatsoever. So success doesn't lead to happiness. We know that happiness is the greatest success, meaning it's the reason that we strive for success. It's the greatest wisdom. It's the reason we strive for wisdom. It's the greatest health. It's the reason we strive for health. And yet, none of those things can bring you the happiness that you seek. And then, third, and most importantly, happiness leads to success, right? Meaning that when you become happy without all the stuff and people that you want, you're happy, which is the point of all the stuff and the people you want. And also, you tend to attract all the people and the stuff that you want. We have decades of empirical research and time-tested, face-valid studies to support that. Happy people live longer lives, 6 to 7 years on average. They make more money, $600,000 to $700,000 on average over the course of their entire lifetime. They get married earlier, stay married longer, are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not, because it doesn't have to do with marriage, it has to do with happiness and love. They experience better health. They're rated as more attractive, physically more attractive than their unhappy counterparts. They also are more charitable and kind and generous. They donate more time, money, energy, and blood to other people and to individuals and social causes that they believe in. And so happiness makes you more attractive, makes you a better person, makes you richer, makes you healthier, and ultimately makes you a lot happier, of course.
It's common sense would say, like, well, if we know all of these things, why is it so challenging for people to, I guess, just to be happy? I know it sounds like a simple question, but we've got the research.
Profound question, Sherry. Profound question that only somebody who's a veteran in this space could ask and really appreciate. And there's both reasons for that are both built into nurture and nature, right? So we have this incredible problem-solving instrument that we call a brain. It's also an incredible problem-creating instrument. It's a troublemaker, right? So brain is built with all of these cognitive biases, most of which help us to survive, but don't always help us to be happy, right? So that's first and foremost. Just the brain is really designed for survival, not happiness. But if you survive in the body, you're going to be a lot more likely to experience happiness in the body too. Second, we double down on that with lots of the habits and behaviors that we practice over and over again and become really very good at. And so when you're surrounded by people who also don't know that happiness is within you here and now at all times, places, and no matter what else is going on, then you tend to continue to buy in to this bad bill of goods that we're all sold, that we'll call programming or conditioning, that tells us happiness must be something outside of you in some other time, place, and person. So when you repeat that story over and over again, you find that very quickly you dig a bit of a hole for yourself and you try to get more leverage out of the things that never gave you the happiness in the first place. Okay, maybe it wasn't $100,000, maybe I need $1 million. Maybe it was $1 million, not $1 million. Maybe I need 10 million or 100 million. Maybe it wasn't the first wife, it's the 10th, or the first husband, but the 20th. So we sometimes double down and we believe that even if we're going in the wrong direction, increasing our speed and momentum will help. But if you're going in the wrong direction to begin with, increasing your speed will not help.
Oh, I like goosebumps. Sorry. So, you talk about the brain because I know for myself and probably a lot of us, that always feels like that's the thing that gets in the way. Because and this is what I loved about your book, Love from the Inside Out, is this deep connection with self, with the separation or this idea that we are separate. And I just want to read this, what you wrote, or you can read it if you like.
Or you can do it. I think you sound better.
I loved this. It said, thinking separates. Oneness is the reality. Thinking is always divisive. It always separates. To think is to separate. To not think is to retain the inherent oneness of all things. This is the practice of love, not thinking. Thoughtless awareness.
Yes. Yes.
That makes me just exhale in that.
Right. It takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to create or discover oneness. It's always already there. We're all one, and there's nothing you can do to change that. But you can experience separateness. You can experience loneliness. You can experience lovelessness, or the illusion thereof. It doesn't mean that it doesn't feel real, but it just means that it isn't ultimately the deepest essence real, right? So we all share our being with each other. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it is there's just one life, right? The same infinite intelligence that hangs the earth on nothing, that rotates it on its axis, revolves it around the super hot star that we call a sun at just the right distance to not burn us up or freeze us. That
Mhm.
infinite intelligence is within you, it's within me, it's within everyone here. That infinite intelligence we might just call life, right? And we don't have a life. We are life. That we have a brain, but we're not our brain. We have a mind, but we're not our mind. We have a body, but we're not our body. We're that which is aware of all those things. So that awareness, call it infinite intelligence, life, some people call it God or source. It's a thoughtless, wordless, faceless, formless something that we ultimately are. And recognizing that, filling into that is what I call love. But it's not something you have to go out and create. It doesn't depend on other people, places, or things. It's something that you ultimately are.
That's so beautiful. I get I get emotional because it took many years on a personal level to be able to, obviously I always was it. We are always, but the awareness of that. And even when I get trapped up or in the humanness of us, and it's always in that stopping and that taking that breath in that moment when we realize what you're saying, that we are one, that everything is connected, that we are okay. Uh, and I find it interesting that so many of us again know this and yet, get caught up on that wheel.
You nailed it. I mean, the challenge is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mm,
When all you have or believe you have is a brain or a mind, everything looks like a problem to be solved, right? And so we don't trust in relaxation. We don't trust in enjoyment. We don't trust in pleasure and rest. And we're rewarded most of our lives for thinking our ways through and out of problems, right? I mean, how did you get through elementary school and middle school and high school and college and that first
yes.
job and the second job and the 10th job? And why'd you get the promotion? It's like because you thought your way through things. And it's extraordinarily helpful and beneficial. The only problem is that we mostly don't use our minds use us. And we can see that reflected in how many similar negative and redundant thoughts we tend to think over and over again. We
Yeah.
get thought stuck in these thought loops, right? And you'll notice that when you're at your unhappiest, when you're at your lowest moments in your life, you're thinking and overthinking and analyzing and overanalyzing. And when you're able to step out of that for a period of time, you discover that the peace and the joy and the happiness that you sought through thinking or the solving of problems or the acquisition of objects or the achievement um, of things in the world, you suddenly discover that it's been there all along, that
Mhm.
the love that you thought came through and from the other person or through and from that relationship never did at all. It was great encouragement, but it was encouragement to find that love within yourself. It always came through and from your own consciousness, in other words, right? So it's hard to kind of come to that recognition if you think about it too much. You want to think about it just a little and then do what you can to try and focus on the experience of it more consistently instead.
I love that you said that, the experience of it, because we want to, or we, like you said, it's so brilliant what you said about just being taught that in school, that is, to think our way out of that. I never thought about that, but it sounds like we were, without using, net programmed to do that this way, because as you said, there's that safety, right? Because our brains keep us safe and want to be like, no, don't try this or don't feel this because you might get hurt. Stay right where you are, where everything is good
That's
and
right,
safe.
Sherry. Exactly. There's an expression, folks don't want to go from the frying pan to the fire, so to speak, right? And we're all afraid that if we stop using thought, discursive thought in particular, and stress and anxiety to fuel our days and fuel our ambition, that we might become these like lazy bumps on a log that don't do anything and don't accomplish or achieve anything. But that's not true. You can actually burn a much cleaner, more efficient, more effective, and more enjoyable fuel that you might call rest or relaxation or enjoyment or happiness or peace. Um, and find that your life is more successful as a result of it. You don't have to overwork and overstress and redline it all the time in order to be successful and happy. In fact, that's quite the opposite of what you want to be doing.
Yeah. Something that I love that you share, and I stand strongly on it, is that I've always shared vulnerably and saying, I don't wait, like I don't pop up out of bed every morning like, woo, like this is the best day ever. I work myself to that, but just like that we're human, and we go through the same things. And you said in one of your, I think it was a recent video, and I really resonated, or it was here on LinkedIn, you said, happy people don't always have different thoughts than unhappy people. Happy people just have a different relationship to their thoughts than unhappy people. And I was like, oh, can you talk a little bit about that?
Appreciate you so much, Sherry. Um, yes, you know, so when I was young, I thought about death a lot. I thought about death a lot, and I thought about how scared I was of it and how anxious I was of it. And I also thought of how sad I would be at the thought of anyone else passing away, which is still, of course, the case. And I thought a lot about like killing myself. I was suicidal for a long time. I was depressed for a very long time. Well into my 20s, from the age of about 6 or 7. And so I had a suicidal experience. At some point I got really fed up, and I just felt like I could never be happy no matter what I achieved, accomplished, or acquired. And I did some research, and I got a steak knife, and I dug it into my wrist. And in that moment, I experienced this peace and this joy and happiness that I hadn't experienced before. And it was very odd to me, very unpredictable, and very unexpected. So I postponed the suicide for like 10 or 15 minutes while I did some additional research. Wasn't sure where it was going to lead. Pretty much was convinced it wouldn't lead anywhere. And then I found that I wasn't alone, first of all. And I started applying more and more what I would read or learn from much smarter people out there in the world who had seemed to solve their unhappiness problem. And so I, to this day, occasionally still have thoughts about death, still have thoughts about suicide, not my own, but my relationship is so different with those thoughts, right? Before it was like, oh no, death, ugh. Now I'm like, what kind of a relief, one day that I won't have to carry around this human costume that at some point will, age out or wear out or rust out. It's interesting because I don't believe the thoughts now that I believed when I was 10 or 12 or 20 or 30 years old. I have a different relationship with those thoughts. So I guess the way to say it is, you can have your thoughts, but your thoughts don't have to have you. And observe your thoughts the same way you do clouds in the sky, or the same way you listen to music on the radio. If at some point in time, or your iPod, at some point in time, you don't want to hear that song, you just hit next, or if you want to hear it again, just hit replay, or you can just turn off the device altogether. And so that's the difference, I think, between happy and unhappy people, is that unhappy people tend to be slaves to their mind, or servants to the mind, and happy people tend to be masters over their mind. And that doesn't mean they always think exactly the thoughts they want to think. It's just that they're able to pivot real quickly when a thought does occur or does surface that's not happy or constructive.
It's a great way of saying that, because I feel like that has been my personal journey, and people that I've worked with is just, it's that awareness of the thoughts and being able to navigate through them as opposed to being lost in them. And that was like the big leap. So much was like, my life is consumed. I don't know another way out, to then like recognize. My mentor says to me, and she might be watching us, and she says that thoughts like audition for our attention.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. I was like, because then it just makes me, and I was like, you don't have to get the part. And then like you said, next.
It's so good, Sherry. And, to that point, I remember early in my life, I've worked in the addiction world for a little while as a spiritual counselor. And, one of my favorite expressions from that world is that your best thinking got you here. If you're addicted, and we're all addicted to something, most of us are addicted to thoughts, which I would insist are the root addiction. Whatever else you're addicted to, it's ultimately a story underneath that you're most addicted to. That our best thinking got us here. And so if your best thinking gets you there, it's an argument for either entertaining alternative ways to explain things to yourself, or to talk about things, or to think about things, or not to have to explain or think about or talk about certain things at all, right? Just because something's true or seems true or real doesn't mean that it deserves your attention, first of all. Second of all, it doesn't mean that it deserves your negative attention. So I'll call it constructive thinking. Sometimes we call it positive thinking. Early on, you talked about toxic positivity. And to your point, being happy and being a positive thinker doesn't mean slapping smiley stickers on empty gas tanks. It's not a snow job. It's like, how can I think about this thing in my life in a way that makes me feel better and therefore will make me do better, right? So we know, based on all this research, that when you feel better, you do better, and life goes better when you just by feeling better. So if we prioritize that first, then we say, okay, what's the truthful but better feeling way or a more constructive way of thinking about or talking about this particular experience, right? So if it's raining outside, is it the worst day ever a bad day, or do you just love sunshine so much and you're looking forward to it, right? I mean, if you have $0 in your bank account, are you broke, or is there only up from here? So it's just a question of constructive thinking. How can I think about this in a way that makes me feel better and supports me in feeling what I want to feel and achieving what I want to achieve?
It reminds me of, and when I was younger, I think I was in college maybe, or shortly after college, where I saw the thoughts behind like, let's make a deal, like door number one and door number two. It was like the outcome or the situation was still the same, but it was like, which door did I want to walk through to look at it? It's like, wah, wah, wah. And it,
That's a great example.
yeah, and it was ultimately, well, if this is a situation and I could think this way about it, or I could think that one of these actually feels better. And it was that like switch that changed everything.
Yes, it requires, and that's kudos to you. It's very commendable. It takes, I suppose, faith or confidence in happiness itself. This is why the science is so critical. And actually, even without the science, just looking at your life and noticing that how, when, for the most part, another bad bill of goods we've been sold is that unless it's painful, it's not going to be gainful, right? No pain, no gain kind of thing, right? And it's a problematic way of thinking about and experiencing life, because that means that the only way you can get ahead is by suffering. And if you're suffering, are you really getting ahead? It's like, I would say no, right? So if you can have more faith in happiness and in feeling good and saying, hey, I don't know how long I'll live, hopefully 100 more years, maybe 10 more seconds. All that I have control of and all that I have in my hands here and now is the present moment. How can I enjoy this present moment as deeply and fully as humanly possible? And if I can trust that by doing that, by making this moment joyful and peaceful and loving, I'll be investing in a more peaceful and joyful and loving future, that I'll be pre-paving one. Suddenly you can relax and say, oh, I don't have to figure it all out. I don't have to have my life just ironed out just perfectly. I can just simply sit here. And if I'm breathing or if I'm typing or if I'm swiffering or folding clothes, I can try to enjoy it more deeply and trust and know that whatever miracle or miraculous experience I'm looking forward to is on its way to me, right? Just that alone is so helpful. I used to get stuck because I'd say, well, what's the value of feeling good now if it means my life is going to be worse in the future? I say, well, it's not about living only for the present moment. It's about living in the present moment, which is a significant difference, right?
Huge difference. I mean, that is the piece, this moment. I mean, that is it. And knowing that if you just sit in here, that, and you're obviously not, it's easy to say like, oh, then you're not worrying about what's coming down the line. But you mentioned something and it just reminds me of, so my personal connection to joy. And when I define joy, it's for me, it's the full expression of all that I feel. So allowing myself to feel the sadness or the grief or the jealousy or whatever, and being okay with that. And that's where my joy comes from. So as I hear you say, just being with it. And I think that, and I want to get your opinion on that might be the resistance that people are always trying to get this happy and then when they're not, there's that self-judgment and all of that about themselves. And then that just puts you further down the spiral.
I experienced that so much. I remember being 17, 18, 23. I remember having this experience where I had such a good life. I had a wonderful, beautiful girlfriend. I had 2 beautiful German cars. I had a great, professional corporate job. I had health and family loved me, and I lived in a great apartment. And I remember feeling like so depressed and so it was beyond dysphoric. I was really depressed, and then feeling such guilt that I couldn't drum up enough gratitude for running water and apply. I was like, what's wrong with me? How can I not? And so then I would just feel so like a horrible person, and I would judge myself. And then of course that only added fuel to this unhappiness fire, and it became worse and worse and worse. And so I know that for me, I had to start with low-hanging fruit. It was making it so much more difficult than it needed to be. We often don't think about gratitude as love, but that's precisely what it is. And so I realized I just need to look for little things that I love, like the littlest things. Like what do I love? What makes me feel good? What makes me feel inspired or uplifted? And sometimes it was just like, well, the sun's out. Okay. Sometimes a beautiful person walks by. Sometimes it was like the taste of chocolate. Sometimes we think we have to feel gratitude for the big things, but you don't have to feel gratitude for the big things. You don't have to feel gratitude for anything. And imposing that on you, that you have to do something in and of itself, increases your happiness. So
Ooh.
yes, I love what you said here, which is happiness is the full expression of all of your emotions. And I would also say um, it undergirds, it underlies, it includes, and it's within all and every emotion that you feel and thought that you have and experience that you have, right? So sometimes I describe happiness as peaceful aliveness, but really it's, and this will be hard for people to hear at first, but it's just recognizing that you exist, like your own blind, naked awareness that you exist, full stop, without any additional commentary. That already, believe it or not, is the peaceful aliveness that I describe as happiness. Already that. And sometimes you find that you're experiencing sadness or unhappiness, or we'll call it stress or anxiety or loneliness. But if you go a little deeper, you discover the inherent and innate happiness that's always there. It's like being in the ocean somewhere, and on the surface, your experience always seems so choppy and tumultuous and turbulent. But if you dive deeper and deeper and deeper, there's nothing but peace
Mhm.
and calm and quiet in that experience. And that's what happiness ultimately is. That ocean includes all of the ups and downs, the ebbs and the flow. But if you're diving deep and you sort of stay centered in the depth of who you are, there's perfect peace, perfect calm, and perfect happiness.
Okay, big exhale again. And we're already like down to time. I'm like, I want to talk to you forever.
Forever,
Um,
Sherry, forever.
forever. Like, don't go anywhere. Just get a big cup of coffee and this is it. No. Um,
No, no.
so, you know, this just this presence, Ricky, who just, I posted that comment, she says, it sounds cheesy, I think she said, or I might have read it, but presence is a gift. And that sounds like what you're saying is the ultimate happiness, is the ultimate everything, is just the presence of this moment. And I think you said somewhere also that happiness is love turned inward.
Yes. So I know I certainly thought of love and happiness as two different energies, as two different experiences, as two different phenomena. But it's the same energy, same experience, same phenomenon, perceived in two different ways, right?
Mm.
So when you're happy, we'll tapped into and turned on, as Abraham Hicks would say. When you're
Oh,
happy, right? Love Abraham.
okay. I take my walks and I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
tapped and turned in, turned on.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. It's an ode to them.
Yes.
When you're happy and you're all by yourself, we call it happiness. Okay? When you're happy and you're with other people, even just one other person, when you're happy and you're togetherness, we call it love, or I call it love. I like to think that we're all rain clouds, right? So the idea with the rain clouds is want to fill yourself up with as much peace, love, self-love, joy as humanly possible. And like a rain cloud, when you become so full of this peace, love, and joy, at some point you can't contain it any longer. And then without an expectation of reciprocity, without an expectation of reward, without any quid pro quo or any negotiation, because you can't contain yourself, because you want to unburden yourself, you shower down upon the earth and all living creatures this peace, love, and happiness. And you do it without any strings attached, right? You just do it to unburden yourself, to relieve yourself, because it feels so good to do. That's love. A lot of the things that we think of love aren't love. We might call them pseudo love. It might be ego, it might be entertainment, it might be lust, it might be anticipation, it might be it might be trauma, okay? It might be an association that you have in the past somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. There's no judgment about any of that. I would just be careful of calling that love. Love is not what you do, love is who you are. And we sometimes get lost in that. We sometimes think we have to go finding it or looking for it or searching for it. But love and happiness ultimately are the same energy seen through two different lenses. Happiness or love is your happiness shared. It's your bliss shared. If it's not happy, it's not love. And it's not loving, it's not happy. So you can test for your happiness by seeing if you're loving. You can test for your love by seeing if it's happy. If it's not, nothing wrong with it, but you're involved in something else that I would not call love.
I keep saying to myself, okay, just one more question. And then I'm like, okay, no, two more.
Yes.
No. No. So, okay. I just actually want to know this on a personal level.
Please.
What inspires you daily? Like, how do you stay in this positive state of mind or being?
I mean, Sherry, honestly, it's this conversation and conversations like it. I'm pretty convinced that when I was young, the reason I was so depressed and suicidal is because I didn't have anyone to talk to about these things. I mean, I just get emotional thinking about it. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, And so I feel such gratitude. I feel such appreciation because it's what I live for. I live for this experience of being able to share the love and the happiness and the peace that I feel. And I feel so much of it for you. So it's this, I'd say, without question. And I basically do this when Sherry's not around. I do this with books, right? I do this with other friends. And I ultimately do it with myself. I mean, all of that I could say is just really doing it with and for and through myself, the self, with capital S. So yeah, so that keeps me inspired. My favorite moments are the ones when I'm probably not thinking, when I forget the entire world, I forget everybody in the world, I forget myself, and I just experience the bliss of not thinking. That's wonderful. I exercise, I watch sports occasionally, but I try to, wherever I go, stay centered in this peaceful aliveness that exists within all of us. That's sort of my chief, I guess, spiritual practice.
Ditto. Ditto. And the watching sports occasionally too.
Yeah.
Well, I got forced to. And so the last question that I'll leave, and then I'll let you share with everybody how they can connect with you and about your book and everything. But what is your hope when you leave a room and you're left with people in there? Like, what do you hope that you have left with them?
Yeah, I don't want to give people guesses. They have enough guesses of their own. I suppose just a taste of happiness, just a taste of peace, just a taste of love, and not to remember me. It's not important, but that they know that the peace and the love and the happiness they feel is coming from within them. That there's this infinite, eternal, bottomless source of peace, love, and joy that exists within them, and they don't have to do a whole lot. In fact, the less you do, probably the better. You don't have to think a whole lot. In fact, the less that you think, probably the better. To achieve a whole lot. In fact, the less that you achieve, probably the better. That you can, and you do, experience that at all points in time. And that happiness doesn't come and go and ebb and flow. That on your awareness of this intrinsic and innate happiness within you comes and goes, ebbs and flows. So I think that's what I most want to leave people with, is that happiness is just being yourself.
Yay. Yay. Again, I'm going to do a shameless plug, but not. My book is called Love Yourself Happy. And
love.
Yeah. And so when I saw both of your books and I read, I was like, oh, it's like the combination. There was that kindred. And as you just said that, I was like, yes, love yourself happy. And for me, happiness is all of, as we said, all of that.
Yes.
Let everybody know where they can find you, connect with you, your book, all that good stuff, what you're up to. I want everyone to love you as much as I do.
Oh my gosh. Love you so much, Sherry. So first and foremost, probably in conversation with Sherry, because I feel like this is a never-ending conversation, which I love. And I mean that in real life, not just here. You can also find me at my website at coachrobmack.com. You can find me on all social media platforms, probably most consistently Instagram at Rob Mack, M-A-C-K official. And you can find both my books, the ones that have been released, Love from the Inside Out and Happiness from the Inside Out, everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, for saying yes to this, for sharing your heart and your soul and allowing all of us to see you so that we can better then see ourselves, and just spreading your happiness and your truth.
Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure, a privilege, and an honor, Sherry. And I want you to know how much I appreciate you, not just for what you do, which I love, but for who you are, which I also love.
Well, this made my year. Thank you all so much for tuning in and watching. And this will be available on all the platforms. And stay tuned for next year. I've got some amazing guests coming in 2023, and wishing you all the most beautiful, joyful, and happy holiday season. Bye, everybody.